Welcome to the table. I'm Kelly, and I'm going to share some tips for running better Theater of the Mind encounters that will leave your players saying, maps? More like, craps? I love maps in D&D. I love large-scale maps that orient you in the world and show you the possibilities of what's out there. And I love battle maps because it helps your players be a little bit more tactical and everyone is very clear on exactly how everything is laid out. That being said, I generally reserve battle maps for more important encounters and use Theater of the Mind for shorter combats or random encounters. Running Theater of the Mind combats can be a great way to simplify your minor encounters and keep the flow going during your session, but only if they don't leave your players feeling confused and disoriented. I've got 3 tips to help with that. The first 2 might be obvious for some of you, but the third one really made a night and day difference for me. It really helps my players understand how everything is positioned throughout the combat. The first and most important way that you can improve your Theater of the Mind encounters is to just know how big stuff is. Now, not everyone is good at judging distances, or even if you are, you still might not know how big a castle gatehouse is, for example. It's just not something I've frequently come into contact with. Originally, I just went and Googled how big various rooms and buildings were until I had a pretty good idea, and then I could estimate from there. But if you don't feel like Googling, how big is a bedroom? How big is a study? How big is a small store? Then I highly recommend the sizing reference chart made by you/always stuck for a name. I've linked the Reddit post in the description down below. I always keep it in my DM screen now, and if you struggle with distances, then I would definitely recommend you do the same. The second tip may be a little controversial for some players as they might feel it's restrictive. This isn't a hard rule that I always stick to, but I do find it makes the layout much easier for everyone to understand. And that is to compress your encounter into 2 dimensions. If all of the distances just become the distance between your party and the monsters, then it is much easier to explain. Since I mostly use Theater of the Mind for shorter encounters, the lack of dynamic monster movement hasn't made the encounters boring, since they usually don't go on long enough to feel stagnant. Now, if a player tries to move around into a flanking position, then I'll certainly allow it, but I'll still reference that player by their distance to the monsters. Behind the screen, I find it really easy to track my player locations if it's just on one axis. I just write down their names or initials and the distance they are from the monsters, scratching it out each time they move. Before I get into the last tip, if you want to roll a nat 20 in your next session, then hit that like button down below. I can't guarantee it. But if you also hit the subscribe button, then there's a pretty good chance that it's going to happen. My third tip, which has really made a big difference for me, is to anchor your encounter on an object. What I mean by that is pick an object in the room and relate everyone's distances to that one object. Generally, I either pick an object that is located where the players start the encounter or where the monsters start the encounter. I usually go for the latter and anchor the encounter on an object where the monsters start, since your players will inevitably move towards the monsters and you want to be working with smaller numbers, not bigger numbers, as the encounter goes on. The object that I use as an anchor could be a change in the type of floor, a natural feature, a door, or some piece of furniture. It just needs to be something in the scene that is unlikely to move and doesn't feel too out of place. Now, whenever your players or your monsters move, just track the distance from that same spot. So when your player asks, how far away are they now? How far away are they now? Okay, but how far away are they now? You can easily take the player's distance to the object and the monster's distance to the object, do some quick mental math, and know where they are. Behind your DM screen, as I mentioned in the last tip, you can write down the player names and monsters and their distances to that anchor object. I usually use positive numbers for those who are in front of the anchor and negative numbers for those who are behind it. So now that you've listened to me yammer on about how you shouldn't use maps in D&D, why not go learn how to use some maps in D&D and some other great tools? And hey, I appreciate you.